Welcome to Nale Yoga. I'm Ruthie Eisenberg, and I'm glad to be here with you today. Today, I'm so honored to welcome a very special guest whose life work bridges botanical wisdom, deep ecology, and contemplative healing. David Crowe is a licensed acupuncturist, a renowned teacher, author, and practitioner of botanical medicine with over 40 years of clinical experience in Chinese, Ayurvedic, and Tibetan healing traditions. He was among the first Westerners to study these systems in traditional settings in Nepal and India, and has been a pioneer in integrating essential oils, herbal medicine, and spiritual insight into both personal and clinical healing. David has taught over 10,000 students through the Shift Network and has brought plant medicine into the lives of hundreds of thousands around the world. He's also the author of Floracopia, a leading voice in the movement for self-care that's not just holistic, but also spiritually rooted and ecologically aware. In today's conversation, I'm so excited to dig into the intersections between stillness and deep rest healing, and also healing through plant intelligence, consciousness, and the subtle rhythms of rest. So, welcome, David, to the show.
Thank you, Ruthie. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're here. And I was actually so excited to talk with you because there's so much overlap between the practices of rest to facilitate healing and and the kind of healing that that you're experienced in, which really requires a slowing down and bringing in a certain consciousness. So I'm curious to learn a little bit more. If you could share, how did you go down this path? How did you get interested in the work of healing, and specifically healing with plants and the earth?
Well, you've already given me a pretty extensive introduction, and I think that maybe rather than just talking about my life story, how it goes back to studying Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic and Tibetan medicine, and their associated spiritual lineages, maybe we could kind of jump into the story kind of halfway through and discuss a specific period of time in my clinical practice where I came to greatly appreciate all of the integration of these lineages, and especially with deep rest and yoga nidra. So I can kind of weave things together from there.
That sounds great.
All right. So we can start around 2000. And I was in Santa Monica, and I had a clinical practice. And my background originally was acupuncture. I was one of the first Westerners to actually get licensed in acupuncture and Chinese medicine in San Francisco. But I wasn't very happy with the level of education. And so I ended up, because of also meeting the Tibetan Buddhist community at that time, this is, in the early 1980s, actually, quite a ways before my clinical practice story. And I ended up getting interested in Tibetan medicine and studied in the Himalayas. But in 2000, I brought together a whole lot of different lineages. I was practicing acupuncture, I was practicing Chinese herbal medicine, but I had also studied extensively with Tibetan medical doctor, and I had Tibetan formulas, and I was also practicing aromatherapy, and I was also doing integrated Ayurvedic treatments with a lot of warm oil massage and steam, and basically bringing together numerous lineages. And so the treatment at that time in this clinic integrated three medical traditions: Chinese, Ayurvedic, and Tibetan medicine. And I was offering people a 3-hour-long treatment. It was kind of like an updated kind of Ayurvedic Panchakarma treatment. But the result of the treatment was this profound relaxation.
Mhm.
And it happened after a series of different stages. So the first stage was that the person would get a warm oil massage and a hot stone massage, and then there would be acupuncture on the back, and then they would do a aromatherapy steam treatment, and then they would receive abdominal massage, and then they would receive acupuncture on the front of the body, and then they would also, while they were receiving acupuncture, they would receive the Ayurvedic treatment called Shirodhara, the warm oil cascade over the head. And this treatment induces yoga nidra. It induces shavasana.
Hmm.
But by the time the person got to this stage, they were already very relaxed. And then I would start the oil treatment while they were also getting their acupuncture. And I was able to observe a very interesting phenomenon, which was that I could actually watch the different stages of the brain waves slowing down, going into deeper and deeper rest. And this is normal because as people are going into progressive deep relaxation, as you know, there's a discharge of neurological muscular tension. People twitch, and there's rapid eye movement and things like that happen, changes in the breathing. And so I was able to observe people going from states of high stress, because this was in Los Angeles. People would come in and they'd be highly stressed, and they would go through this very rapid decompression neurologically through this series of treatments. Now, that process of decompressing is really what we're trying to do with all natural medicine. It's what we feel when we do shavasana, corpse pose after a yoga class. It's the purpose of yoga nidra. It's the purpose of all relaxation therapies. It's the purpose of massage. It's the purpose of acupuncture. Basically, all natural medicine is just trying to decompress the tension in the body. But if we look at that process through the lens of Ayurvedic and Chinese medical terminology, then we can understand the process in some unique ways. And so what happens then when people go into that state is a profound state of relaxation, physically, neurologically, mentally, emotionally, but a state of lucidity also. In other words, they frequently feel profoundly relaxed, but at the same time, they're also alert, aware. Now, if we look at this in terms of energy flow, what's happening in the body, this is described as removing the influence of the mental activity that's moving through the nervous system. So the mental activity has various kinds of names like mind stream or discursive thought.
Okay.
And it's basically the activity of the sense of self, the ego, that is telling a story mentally to itself, and it's responding. And generally, the activity of the ego is accompanied by contraction, sympathetic activity, sympathetic nervous contraction, because the ego is worried about things and it's causing tension, contraction. And so all the healing modalities are basically to counteract the sympathetic overstimulation and help to enter into more of a parasympathetic relaxation response. Now, in that state, one of the predominant sensations is flow. There's a flow of energy. People feel very light. They feel like the body's kind of dissolving. They feel like the body is becoming transparent. I'm sure that you're familiar with many testimonials about how people's subjective experience of the body changes during yoga nidra. Well, that's really a fascinating thing to consider. What is actually happening? Well, we can describe that medically in terms of relaxation response and all of that, but what I am most interested in is how this tells us, the implications of this, that the body is actually a projection of our own consciousness, and that our subjective experience of the body is not a fixed thing. And we can see this in a real fundamental way because every night when we go to sleep, the body disappears. So the body is really an aspect of our consciousness that comes and goes. The body is not a thing. Consciousness perceives the body and then it doesn't. And consciousness perceives the body as comfortable and then it's not comfortable. So there's this constant flow. The way we could describe the body from the perspective of consciousness is the body is just a stream of sensation. And some of those sensations are pleasant and some of them are unpleasant. But then all those sensations all disappear and we go to sleep and we experience other things or not experience anything at all. And then the body appears again. So in this state that arises in Ayurvedic treatments with Shirodhara or in Shavasana or in Yoga Nidra, basically what's happening is that the person is experiencing a change in the subjective experience of the body. Now, this turns out to be a fundamental aspect of many spiritual traditions and medical traditions also. And what I have been particularly intrigued about is the implications of what it ultimately means and what we can ultimately do with it. So another example, before I return to that treatment in animal.
Yeah, I'm curious about the implication.
Yeah, well, the another treatment or another method we find in Taoism, in Qigong breathing. There's a method of breathing called Xing Qi breathing, which means very slow, mindful breathing. And the way they describe the effect is they say the bones dissolve into clouds. Okay, now, my exploration with this is if the body is actually not a thing, if the body is actually part of our consciousness and we can transform the subjective experience of it, then how deeply can we go and what do we find? And this is what people experienced in this treatment, is that they would basically dissolve. And so after the treatment, when people would get up, they would be extremely relaxed. And this is where the healing takes place. The healing takes place because the body is so relaxed. And the way that Ayurveda describes it is that the prana, the chi, is flowing freely without any blockages. And if the prana is flowing freely with no blockages, that means that the healing power of the body is flowing freely. And that's because the life force that is in the body, the prana, the breath, the energy that's flowing in the body, that's actually the energy of intelligence of the immune system. It's the intelligence of homeostasis. And that intelligence comes from the biosphere that is creating homeostasis in all living things. And so therefore, what we're really doing is we are getting out of the way of nature's energy inside of us. And that's the state of deep relaxation. The prana is flowing, and prana is intelligence, and intelligence is homeostasis. And all of that is functioning because our mind is quiet finally.
Mm-hmm.
So I observed people going through this, and then I would sit down with them afterwards and I would say, well, how do you feel? And they would say, well, I feel incredibly relaxed. I feel all kinds of pleasant sensations, and I feel well-being, and I'm breathing more deeply, and, all the results that come from yoga nidra, basically, shavasana and shirodhara. And so then I would say, well, what created that? And they would say, well, there was the warm oil, there was the acupuncture, there was the steam, aromatherapy, and shirodhara, and said, no, none of that created it. Those were all just external stimuli that help your nervous system, specifically your brain, to change its perception of the body. And this is now a physical experience that you are having. And so then we would sit for a minute, and I would encourage people, memorize what this feels like. Memorize this state. What does this state feel like? And so they would describe it, okay, and then they get familiar with it. And I would say, your brain created that just now, and you can bring that back again with practice at will. And so do that. That's your homework assignment. Go home and practice bringing back yoga nidra over and over and over again. And so this is actually training the brain to enter into this state over and over. And that's how these treatments that had come from these different traditions started to overlap with spiritual practice. So why don't we pause here? That was a long answer. I kind of went off track there, but I hope that kind of sets the context here a little bit.
Yeah, you shared so much. I feel like we can go in so many directions, and I have so many questions for you. I think to me, what stands out most from what you're saying is really that there is this natural healing process that happens when we set the conditions for the body's and the consciousness's own intelligence to create the healing. And we do that by getting out of the way. And in a world that's filled with so much noise and so much distraction, we're constantly getting in the way of this deep relaxation that enables the conditions for healing to happen. So I'm curious, when your clients go home, and I really like how you give them this template. This is what true relaxation feels like. This is what your body, mind, soul, the whole system feels like when it's in an optimal condition. And now you have a template to compare it against. So you can always, with practice, you can recreate this and work your way up to accessing this state at any time. So I'm curious, how do your clients integrate this? Because it's one thing to experience it with a facilitator in a office or in a healing setting, and then there comes the integration and the discipline of integrating these practices and programming them into the body, the mind, the whole system consciousness, deliberately, methodically, patiently over time. So I'm curious if you could share how the integration works for some of your clients.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I would break down the people that I work with into two primary categories.
Mm-hmm.
One is medical patients,
Mm-hmm.
and the other is meditation students and practitioners.
Mm-hmm.
And they overlap, but on the one hand, with the people I work with medically, then the focus is not always on spiritual practice or meditation, a lot of it has to do with preliminary stages of improving the diet and starting an herbal program. And fairly quickly, we get into stress reduction techniques. Okay. Because it's all part of it. Because the more relaxed we are, the more effective the herbal medicine is. And so relaxation and herbal medicine go together perfectly. Meditation practice and herbal medicine have always been used together. But there are people, and this is typical of any medical practice, and there is people who consult with me one time, I never see them again. Or there are people that consult with me and I work with them for an extended period of time, and we see progress medically. And in those cases, then eventually we get to the deeper spiritual dimensions of healing and the nervous system. And of course, stress and anxiety and sleep disorders are a pandemic. And so there's a lot of relaxation methods that come in conjunction with healthy lifestyle and herbs. But that's on the medical side. And I would say that I have some patients that I've been working with for a period of time who have really integrated deep relaxation and spirituality into their healing process medically. Then on the other side, I have people that I would describe as meditation practitioners who are also my students. And some of these people have an extensive amount of background and training long before they met me. And then they have joined me for regular meditation Sangha practices and taken some of my meditation courses and so forth. And these are people that I meet with on a regular basis, and we discuss their progress and the implications of what they're doing. And I would say that like all meditation groups or all meditation lineages, there's a spectrum of people who are doing it very, very seriously, all the way to people who are, doing it occasionally. But I would say that out of the group of serious meditation practitioners and out of the group of the serious self-care medical patients that I have, that what it comes down to is that they need a method first. They need a method that they can relate to. And I think that this is where what I'm teaching about this and applying in medicine is very helpful, because a lot of meditation lineages are very abstract and they're very, observe the mind type of thing, which is very difficult for people to do. And so I'm really focused on the physical retraining of the brain and the deep neurological relaxation as the entryway into deeper meditation, samadhi. And that's something that people can really relate to. So I have been focused on a very specific meditation practice that came out of my medical practice, which is listening to our own heartbeat. And this has opened up huge exploration for myself and others, because it's medical and it links also to spiritual traditions. And so we can feel the prana of the heart, and we can see the interface of mind and matter, and it links to many tantric practices of visualizing the heart center and the deity practices associated with the heart chakra. There's a vast range of practices that can open up in a biological way, just listening to the heartbeat. So what it comes down to then is that the people who have applied these teachings most consistently and the most deeply have found a way to do it for themselves. That's the key, is that people have to learn that, I can actually create a meditative state. And this is the best way that works for me. And now I'm going to see what I can do with this. So that's my answer to that. It's very individual, but we all have to find a way to move back into practice over and over and over again. And as we do, we become aware that it is body-based, And doing body-based practices are the doorway for a lot of people to go into much deeper spiritual contemplations.
Mhm.
That's what I have seen.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. And it's interesting because meditation, it is such a broad thing, and there's so many different types of meditations out there. But I found that a lot of people, especially who struggle with anxiety, have a really hard time with standard meditation where you're observing your mind or you're redirecting your mind, and they sit down, they start trying to concentrate before it even gets to a state of meditation. And then, of course, all of these thoughts show up, and then they start judging themselves for being a bad meditator. And then they get more anxious and say, okay, meditation is not for me. So, so I completely agree with you that, the relaxation it's a prerequisite for getting into, the deeper states of consciousness, and also that there's not, that a method is important, but there's not like one way that works for everybody. Everybody has to find their own path. I myself, I spent so many years living from the neck up and being very, like, very cerebral, but when it comes to paying attention to the body, that's like a different planet. So, and I have clients also who feel quite disconnected from the body and have a very hard time even paying attention to the physical sensations. Even closing the eyes can feel quite triggering for some people, especially people who've gone through trauma or people who feel unsafe. So I'm curious to hear from you. How do you support people who really have a just a very hard time with connecting to the body to begin with?
Yeah,
Because that's
good.
a lot of people. I imagine a lot of people who come to your practice struggle with connecting to the body.
No, this is a great question. And I'll mention briefly that the people who went through that 3-hour relaxation treatment, occasionally, they wouldn't be able to enter into deep relaxation. These were the people that would talk nonstop through the massage and just talking and talking. And I always knew that was a warning sign.
Yeah.
Then, when it came time to just be alone and experience a warm oil cascade, they would frequently have a panic response. And so this is, amygdala at work. This is the fear-based memories getting triggered by relaxation. People are allergic to relaxation.
That's right,
That-
the limbic system.
and that's the trauma response. But let's back up here just a little bit more, and this will also answer the question, but in a bigger context, and also put yoga nidra as a practice into a historical context, okay? Because what you're talking about here is extremely important. You can't just take people who are very tense and who have, years and years of this amygdala fear-based learning traumatizing their nervous system. It's got to uh, work at a much deeper level, and sometimes even more physical things don't really work as well. Sometimes it's got to really be. I mean, let's be honest. Sometimes people just need pharmaceuticals. There's no other way to get at it. But
Mm.
I wanted to tell you about an ancient tradition. Most of what we know about yoga nidra comes from Ayurveda and from yoga. But I came across some really interesting teachings in my studies of Tibetan medicine, and it describes exactly what you are asking about. And there is a temple that is part of the Potala in Lhasa in Tibet, the residence of the Dalai Lamas. And this temple is called the Temple of the Snake Goddess. And
Oh,
on
wow.
the top floor is a shrine room that is called the Lukang. And in this shrine room, there is all the walls are painted with murals. And this was very, very secret until recently. And now this information is coming out about the Lukang murals, all right? And the Lukang murals depict the Dzogchen yogic tradition. And this is one of the primary meditation lineages of Vajrayana Buddhism that came out of Tibet. And what's important here is that these traditions progressed from one stage to another. And so this is part of the problem that people have with meditation. They are told, okay, now sit down and do this particular kind of meditation, but it's completely out of context because there are stages of development. There are stages of training. There are stages of training the body. There's stages of training asanas, yogic training, breathing training, visualization training, devotional training. It's a complete system. Historically, traditionally, people didn't just jump into, and try to empty your mind. So there is part of this mural that depicts Yoga Nidra. And it's very fascinating to understand the psychology of what is being taught here, because on this mural, there are two depictions. It actually depicts all the way across all these yogis doing all these different kinds of things, and all the teachings are there. But at the beginning, there's this image, and there's a naked man, and he's dancing around in the Himalayas. Okay. So there's this image. And say, well, what does that mean? And then next to him, there's another man who's lying down under a blanket. And so then the question is, well, what are these two guys doing? Well, now these two images of these two men are a complete set of teachings. And these are medical teachings, and they are about Shavasana. And the instructions are, and this is at the very beginning, when you first train in meditation in this lineage, what you do is you are instructed to go out by yourself, out in nature, and act crazy, okay? Mm-hmm. And you are instructed to imagine all the realms of existence and act it out. So you are instructed to imagine that you are suffering in a hell realm, you are being tortured in a hell realm, that you are now in a heaven realm, that you are enjoying all of these different realms, and you are instructed to do this psychodrama all by yourself out in nature. And after you do all of these things physically in these greatly exaggerated forms, then you lie down and you do Shavasana. Mm-hmm. And then you get up and you act out something else again. And then you lie down, you do Shavasana. And what happens is that we become aware that all mental states of existence, all forms of existence, are actually just projections of our own mind, and we act them out, and then we lie down and we relax, and then we act it out and we relax. Mm-hmm. Now, another aspect of this that is very yogic, that is not such a big part of contemporary Yoga Nidra, is that people are instructed to go into Yoga Nidra step by step by step, deep relaxation, but stay awake, deep relaxation, stay awake, and then do the same thing, which is you re-invoke, you reawaken a terrible memory, but you do not respond neurologically. And mm-hmm. that breaks the bond between the memory and the physiological reaction, because we need to train the brain to have memories with complete total detachment and equanimity, because it's not the past experience that's the problem. It's the bondage to the emotional reactions. Yeah. That is what the old practices of enacting all of these different heaven realms and hell realms and then just relaxing into yoga nidra, so that you could observe that, oh, now your mind is becoming very peaceful again, and now it's going to go and it's going to get really active. It's this process of making the mind active, making it relaxed, making it active, making it relaxed, until you can see that everything is your own mind. And in the second part, when we do yoga nidra at a very, very deep level, and the body is basically dissolving into emptiness and it feels very tranquil, then we can bring those unpleasant memories back up again, and we can observe them in a state of deep rest and equanimity. Now, that's also, at a pharmacological level, that's also what happens. There's a lot of research into traditional methods. It can happen with entheogens, but a specific entheogen that's getting a lot of research is ibogaine. Yeah, comes from the root iboga from West Africa, and it's what is called a dissociative entheogen, where basically people remember everything, but they don't have the emotional charge to it. And so that's the deeper level of psychological healing that is actually necessary for people who cannot relax, for people who cannot meditate, is that you've actually got to retrain the brain physically by going deeper and deeper into states of relaxation as much as possible, to disassociate. Now, that word disassociate is very problematic because there's a pathological dissociation, but what we're talking about here is deep equanimity, okay? And that's different because deep equanimity is also clarity and wisdom, okay? Deep equanimity is not, psychiatric dissociation. So that's the deeper level of yoga nidra from a historical context, and that addresses your question about, how do we do this when we can't just meditate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. I'm blown away. This is really fascinating what you're sharing. Wow. Yeah, that's really fascinating. I'm so blown away. I think that it's interesting how. Well, first of all, I feel like I need to go to the forest now and act out all these different states of all these emotional states. But also, there's something so powerful about this dynamic rhythm between activity, rest, safety and challenge. It's almost like this titration of the breath or everything that we have in the structure of the world. It goes according to this dynamic dance between polarities. And this is exactly what you're describing. Um, so I think that's really interesting also how, you're describing that this is a real way of supporting healing on a very deep level when we can experience some of the shadows, the traumas, the scary memories, but from a state of complete rest and deep relaxation. When we're in a safe space, then we can have this compassionate kind of neutrality, or this compassionate witnessing. And I think when you're talking about dissociation, perhaps that's what you're saying. It's not dissociating like I'm here, but I'm not really, but my mind is somewhere else. No, it's actually a state of complete presence and a compassionate witnessing. And so you're unlinking or untethering the emotional grip that the memory has over you. You can have this memory and also be okay at the same time. It doesn't have to, hold you with its teeth anymore. And that's very deep work. But again, if you could clarify for people who have a hard time even entering into that state, uh, how would you begin? For people who have a hard time, yes, you can, and yes, you can if you are able to confront some of these deeper emotions through this deeper state of yoga nidra, then of course meditation and being present with yourself and exploring the inner terrain becomes easier. But even to get to that deep yoga nidra state, it can be quite a challenge.
Of course.
Yeah. And so
And the
maybe
one that
here also the role of, you started talking about in plant medicine and entheogens and ibogaine. If you could also weave into, as you're talking, weave into where do you see the role of perhaps using some, plant assistance in supporting these deeper healing states?
Mhm. Yeah. This
Yeah.
is very crucial to understand. And the answer is that it has to be done on a case by case basis.
Mhm.
And the problem that we are encountering in our culture is that we have all of these lineages and traditions that have come to us, and everything's out of context. And therefore, there's a lot of people who should not use entheogens because they're not prepared. It used to be that you grew up in a culture and you learned all these things and you were guided by the elders. And now you
Mhm.
just go and do it on a Saturday night at a yoga studio, and
Mhm.
it's completely out of context. There's no cultural context. There's no methodological, archetypal context. There's no training context. There's no, elder context, ceremonial context, nothing. It's just entheogens.
Mhm.
Yeah. That can be very destabilizing. There are many people who are being hurt by entheogens because their nervous system and their psyche are too fragile to handle that amount of activation.
Mhm.
And so they're told, oh, if you go and have this experience, it's going to clear out your emotional trauma. And they end up having a psychotic breakdown instead. And the same thing happens with intensive meditation. And people hear, well, if you go to a 10-day Vipassana retreat, it's going to help you bring back all your memories and you'll clear all that trauma, and they have a psychotic breakdown instead. And again, it's because there's no context. There's no
Mhm.
training. There's no sequence. Okay. And that's the most important part of all of this. So when I talk to people and I have a sense of where they are at in terms of their ability to do things, then I generally advise that they go very slowly and carefully. And people ask me, should I do entheogens for this? And I say no. Or in some cases, I say yes, but you
Mhm.
should do this first.
Mhm.
Or they say they're coming to see me because they've already had their psychotic breakdown. And now what do I do? Okay.
Mhm.
So what I help people understand is what works best for your own psyche. Because the mind is fragile, the nervous system is fragile. It can be easily broken by too much intensity of stimulation. And I've seen this happen also, just in motivational weekends, people, whenever they go through intensive social activity, lack of sleep, they don't eat right, blood sugar goes off, people can have psychotic problems that way too. So there's a general misconception in our society that all of these things are good for everyone, and they're not. And it has to be done very carefully. Now, the way to do it carefully for this person that you're asking about, okay, they cannot enter even into relaxation because relaxation is associated with vulnerability. And vulnerability is translated by the nervous system as panic. Okay. And so um, the amygdala will simply not allow a person to sleep at all. Classic PTSD. Okay.
Mhm.
They're in bed for 10 hours every night. And they're exhausted because they never even started to sleep. Okay. So this is difficult. And frequently it's difficult on many levels, even before it gets to clinical. Okay. And it's difficult because a lot of times those people are on medications to manage it. And so you've got two conditions. You've got the underlying PTSD, And then you've got the psychiatric medications, and the psychiatric medications are causing their own set of problems. And withdrawal from those are the worst. Or you have people who maybe are not on medications, but they're not very functional. It's very difficult for people with PTSD to maintain stable relationships and done a job and keep resources. And so it's asking a lot of those people to have a disciplined lifestyle and to be able to afford therapy. You know that as a clinician, that the people who need it the most are the ones who can't afford it and they can't get it and they don't have, they don't even have a kitchen where they can cook up some teas. So this is unfortunately really bound up with all the socioeconomic issues of our culture. And what we do see, and I'm sure that this is in your practice also, is you do see people who are dealing with PTSD at a pretty high level and they cannot relax and they cannot go into yoga nidra, but they have a stable home and they have finances and they want to work on it. But the problem is that they've seen everybody. They've gone here and there and they've done this and the acupuncture works for half an hour. All these things happen.
Yeah.
And that's because the nervous system is too deeply traumatized to actually go very far. So what I advise, to answer your question now, finally, is that you can only do things one small body sensation at a time. And the best way to do it is to use some herbs in conjunction with relaxation and body-based awareness. Now, this is a pretty mild, safe way for people. There's nothing confrontational with the psyche. You're not going in and blowing out your chakras, having these entheogenic experiences. So what I suggest is I give people a pharmacy, some choices, really simple. And it ranges everything from really mild, like make a strong cup of chamomile tea, maybe something a little stronger, maybe a little passion flower tincture, maybe something a little grounding, some ashwagandha, or maybe something that is supportive of meditation for the brain, like the reishi mushroom. Just make something, half a cup of something warm, and then sit down with it. All right, now here's the body-mind practice. And this is where people now have the opportunity to either do it or not do it. And this is part of the psychology of this, is that many times when people are traumatized, it's almost impossible for them to just do the routines that they need to do. But once they can do it for a while, it starts to help them. So the routine is sit down with your cup of herbal tea and feel the whole body and feel the parts of the body that are most relaxed. Identify where you feel a little physical relaxation. Then sip on the tea and pay attention to the taste, pay attention to the fragrance, and pay attention to the sensations as it's entering the body. Now, right away, that's a kind of meditation. It gives people something to pay attention to.
Yeah, and even as you were saying it's making me feel more relaxed even without the tea.
Exactly. And then when the herbs start to work in the body, then I tell people, okay, and sometimes I do this actually in a session. We do this together. And I say, okay, now feel those sensations of comfort spreading through the body. Now, a very interesting thing happens when we take herbs with mindfulness. The effects of the herbs are potentized because we feel them more. And the more we feel what the herbs are doing, that means the more the physiological responses are activated. So we have the power to greatly enhance just a simple cup of chamomile tea. We can turn it into a potent narcotic if we want. And so the person sips the tea, they feel the body sensations, they feel themselves becoming more relaxed. And then I point out, this is your own brain learning how to relax. Pay attention to what's happening. But then the next part, which is crucial, is amplify it. You can amplify it. And this is nothing more than basic biofeedback training. When you learn that you can relax a muscle and it produces a sensation of relaxation, you can relax that muscle again, and you can relax it again and again. And so you just teach the person to drink that tea, feel the pleasure, feel the relaxation, feel the warmth, feel those sensations spreading, pay close attention, notice how they're getting stronger. Now amplify it and do it yourself. The herb is helping you, but it's your own brain that's doing the relaxation. Now do more of it. And so you can take a person who's really tense and you can lead them into a state of deep relaxation in 10 minutes with a cup of relaxing tea combined with mindfulness. And that's also where herbs integrate with yoga nidra. So what I suggest then for people who cannot do this guided meditation sitting up, to use a yoga nidra tape, which I'm sure you have the best recommendations for. Now take that yoga nidra relaxation tape and sip some herbs before you lie down and feel the herbs going through you. And now enter into the yoga nidra practice and periodically pause and sip more and notice how the herbs are potentizing the yoga nidra effect, and vice versa. Notice how the yoga nidra effect is potentizing the herbs. Because the more tense we are, the more the gut-brain axis is contracted and the less the nutrients get in. Whereas the more relaxed we are, the more open digestive system is, and the more the nutrients get in. And so relaxation and nutritional assimilation are totally linked. But that's how we can work with really difficult cases, but it all has to be put in the context that that person has to have the resources. They have to have the mental capacity to keep coming back to it over and over again. And frequently in these cases, as you know, we find people that go from doctor to doctor, practice to practice, and they don't actually get around to working on themselves, because they want somebody to fix them. And that's totally human. It's a totally natural thing, because working on ourselves is really hard. And this is the hardest thing, to actually retrain our brain is the hardest thing, but it is synonymous with spiritual practice. And it is synonymous. It raises all of these questions about what is the ultimate goal. And the ultimate goal of all the spiritual practices is the same. And that's to get out of suffering. Okay. And so we have to ask a fundamental existential question. Is there an ultimate relief from suffering? And when we enter into that state of deep yoga nidra, that well-being, where the ego is subsiding, where the prana, the healing power of nature is flowing freely, and we feel that comfort and we feel that clarity, and we feel the body becoming very light and dissolving, and the past no longer matters, or we may actually experience the past in a joyful way because we realize that it brought us to this state. Then we can get a little taste, a little glimpse into the potential to actually be in that state as a normal state of health and well-being. And I think that that's the ultimate process for healing. And that state can be entered into even if we are not well physically. We can transcend physical suffering even when we're in it. We can transcend the psychological suffering even when we're in it. But that's not for everybody. It's not everybody. Everyone is not capable of doing that. This requires deep concentration, deep dedication, deep prolonged practice to do this, to enter into this. And this is not part of our culture. Deep, prolonged spiritual practice is not part of our culture.
No.
So that's
Yeah.
that's how I would answer that.
Yeah. Well, and I like how, the practice that you described with the cup of tea and the yoga nidra at the same time in tandem. It's such a great way to do something so simple, and yet make it so meaningful and such a deep, profound experience. Um, and you're right that, the spiritual path, there's no shortcuts to it. In entheogens, psychedelics, they're not, sometimes people think that, okay, if I do this, I'm going to have this mind-blowing experience and it's going to magically, solve everything. And the reality is that it's not a shortcut because it boils down to the integration. It boils down to the daily practice, which requires patience, discipline, showing up, persisting through all of the challenges, all of the resistances, all of the stuck points. And yes, and it requires dedication. Sometimes we think spirituality, when you're spiritual, you're in this like really pleasant, amazing kind of state all the time. But really, authentic spirituality, it's about, I'll share what it is for me because it's different for different people. For me, it means that you are meeting exactly what is, and even when it's not comfortable and not pleasant, but you are welcoming everything that is showing up from you and to you and through you, with compassion and with receptiveness and also with boundaries. But you're learning it from it and you're realizing that actually, our mind has such potential to be the architect of our own reality. Um, we learn this through meditation, we learn this through spiritual teachings, and of course, we learn this through the yoga nidra practice. When you're laying down with all of the sensory channels except for hearing shut off, and around you, outside of you, nothing is changing. You're still in the same room, same place, same position, but on the inside, you could be having, you could be experiencing completely polar opposites. You could be experiencing feeling very hot or very cold or very happy or very sad. So you're creating all of these experiences for ourselves. And yeah, I feel like everything that you're sharing, it's really just opening my mind more and more and making me intrigued and curious to learn more. As we start winding down for today, David, I know we've been focusing a lot on people who have a hard time getting connected to the body. Um, I'm wondering if you have any advice or any suggestions for people who actually are very connected to the body and already, committed to their practices, but want to deepen their experiences.
Well, no, there's only one thing we can do. If we have found the method that seems to be the right thing for us, that holds our interest, that we feel benefits from doing, that does not create all kinds of internal conflicts or raises all kinds of doubts because maybe it's associated with, a lineage or a teacher who's problematic. It has to be a deeply personal practice that we have found that works for us. And when we find that and it works for us and there is nothing else to do except to practice, that's it.
Just keep doing what you're doing.
And the practice deepens and deepens and deepens. And furthermore, the practice then becomes the teacher.
Mm.
You see, so at a certain point, one of the signs of making genuine progress is that we are no longer needing to get outside opinions about spiritual methods. Okay. We can find them inside ourselves. And this is also clearly stated in lots of lineages that the role of the teacher is to give the teaching, and the teaching about the practice leads to the practice, and the practice becomes the teacher. The practice becomes the teacher. And that's what's most important, is that if we go deeper and deeper into the practice, we learn more and more and more. And that's something that is no longer necessary to rely on anybody. In other words, we want to get to the point where we are relying on our own practice for our own spiritual progress. And we will know if we need to get new teachings. We will know if we need to get new ideas, new directions, and things like that. But I would say that, there are two extremes to this problem. One is that people go and they just go from teacher to teacher and practice to practice, and they never go very deeply with anything. Or the other extreme is that people just focus on one thing for way too long, and it's not even doing anything for them because they've heard that, I should do this. Okay. But when we find a genuine practice that really works for us, then we know how it is helping us. We know, we see the benefits, we feel the transformation happening, and we want to do it more. And that's a really good level to get to. And so that's the answer. When we find practice, go more deeply, and the practice becomes the teacher. And that's all that's necessary, because it's not necessary to keep getting more teachers or more teachings or more practices. We just go more and more deeply. And ultimately, it's up to us to find how deeply can we go into our spiritual practice. That's the main difference.
I like that. Okay. So speaking of practice, as we wrap up for today, if you would you be willing to share a little bit about your personal practice and also let's start with your personal practice, and then I'll ask you where people can find you.
Well, why don't we kind of roll those two things together? Because my personal practice is in a few different lineages, and I have explored those lineages in quite a bit of depth for a long period of time. And now my practice is available as my own teachings. And so I would say, if you would like to know what are my main practices, I would say you can find the practices that I do basically outlined in two offerings that I have. And these are over on my website. And since you were asking where people can find me, they can also find my practices. And the website is my consultation site, and that is crowconsultations.com, just like it sounds, crowconsultations.com. And there are two specific courses that are there. And I will tell you what those practices are. The first course is called Listening to the Heart. And that is a complete system of meditation that is biologically based and derived from the lineages of yoga and Ayurveda and Tantra and Chinese medicine and Qigong. But it's a very simple practice of just listening to the heartbeat. But in the heartbeat, we find that there are all these dimensions. There's the prana of the heart, and then there's the question of where does that prana come from? There's listening to our own mind. There's listening to the movement of the elements of nature, earth, water, fire, air, space, going through the heart, how we're connected biologically. There's so many things that are spiritual teachings that we can feel in our own heartbeat. And this has been very, very helpful for people. And this is where I have learned a lot about how does this practice help people, because we've had a Sangha that's been going on for 2 years. And so every 2 weeks, I hear from people, their experiences, and this practice has helped people tremendously, just listening to the heartbeat. And that's my main practice. But then The second course that I would refer to is called the Illuminated Chakras. And this is not based on the contemporary system of the chakras, which was basically created by Westerners in the early 1900s. It's more like a system of biopsychology. It's not really what the chakras were about, but the classical system of chakras goes way, way back. And that's based on something very profound that we have been talking about this entire time. And that is that the body isn't what we think it is. The body is basically a projection of our consciousness, and therefore we can actually dissolve the body. And this is the basis of the tantric practices. The very first thing you learn in the tantric practices is you dissolve the body. You enter into the space element. And what does that mean? That means that you are disconnecting the attention from the substance of the body, the earth element, and you are basically placing it into the realm of the space element instead. And in that practice, the body becomes very light. It's like doing yoga nidra, except sitting up in meditation. And then in that body of emptiness, in that luminous empty body, that prana body, then you do all of these kind of alchemical transmutations inside that have to do with basically discovering our own identity, reflecting on our own nature. So those are the two primary practices that I do, and those are both available on that site. And the other thing that I teach extensively and do extensively is the integration of meditation and taking herbs together. And so there's a short course that's also available there called Illuminated Herbalism, which is how to use certain herbs to support different kinds of meditation and how to use different kinds of meditation to potentize different kinds of herbs. So those are the three primary things that I do.
Mhm. Awesome. And we'll have the links to your contact in the show notes so that people can access your website and can get connected to your offerings.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the courses sound really amazing. So, highly encourage listeners to follow the White Rabbit and click on those links.
Thank you.
Okay, David. So, was there anything else as we wrap up that you wanted to impart on listeners? Any loose ends you wanted to tie up, or anything you want to, any final words of wisdom that you want to share?
Well, I would just like to thank you personally. Now, of course, for the invitation. It's been very enjoyable, but more importantly, for the good work that you are doing as a clinician and for bringing this very, very important lineage of practice, to people to help them alleviate their suffering and to move far beyond their suffering into, the deeper states of spiritual illumination. So thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying that. I received that, and I want to thank you as well for the beautiful work that you're doing. I think we're all trying to do our best here and just walking this path together.
Indeed.
If you enjoyed this conversation, I invite you to share with family and friends, subscribe to this podcast to help it grow, or leave feedback, whether online or offline. You're also welcome to join the Nale Yoga community on WhatsApp for the most recent updates on new podcast episodes and local events. Wishing you a wonderful rest of your day or night, wherever you are in the world, and I hope to meet you back here again soon. Be well.